My guest at this time is Jason Isaac. He is a former Texas state representative and is now the senior manager and distinguished fellow of Life Powered at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's also recently written a response to what we've seen so far of the Green New Deal from some of the more progressive elements of the Democratic Party. And Jason, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, what do you think is the reality of the Green New Deal? There's a couple different versions floating out there, and when we all saw the talking points last week, which talked about things even to the extent of providing government benefits for people unwilling to work, all of a sudden we heard from the likes of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez that this wasn't really our plan. This was either leaked early or is fake or some version of not the real plan. So what do you think we know at this point about what their agenda really is?
What was it that Donald Trump said last night? President Trump, said last night about this being a bad term paper from a high school student. I think that's actually a compliment. It's a massive grab for government, and the plans keep changing. You're seeing papers getting pulled off of websites that reference cow farts. I've said since last year that next thing you know, they're going to be coming after our food supply, and that's exactly what was published on a website by Representative Cortez and then pulled down later at the time. This is really just about growing government, taking control from the people, and really changing us from a representative republic to a socialist country.
Let's talk about one of the facts you point out in your piece here, which I think is interesting, is that even if U.S. emissions were completely eliminated by next year, by 2050, the global temperatures would only be 0.077 degrees Celsius lower than they are right now. They're, of course, saying that we need to eliminate fossil fuels basically in a decade, by 2030. So obviously they're going off of a recent government report and saying that 2030 is some sort of tipping point here. But even if they got what they wanted, what could they actually accomplish in a decade?
Absolutely nothing other than putting millions of people out of work, increasing electric costs for those people around the entire country, and increasing, or we'd have less reliable access to energy. And what we've seen over the last 10 years, as more people are getting access to energy, we're seeing poverty decrease. We're seeing life expectancy increase. We're seeing illiteracy decrease. We're seeing wonderful things because more people around the globe are getting access to our energy. And for the first time ever, we're a net exporter of energy. The last thing we want to be doing is curtailing our use because we get more freedoms, we get more prosperity, and the United States is leading the world in clean air. If anything, we should be wanting to export, and we are, our energy to other countries to help them clean their air.
Talk a little bit more about what you think the economic impact would be. How much would tax rates have to go up? What would be the actual toll on job creation and job losses and that sort of thing?
Well, Germany's a perfect example. Had this pledge to go completely renewable years ago, and what they've seen is their electric costs have tripled. So could you imagine paying 3 times what you're currently paying for your electric bill? I couldn't stand for it. It wouldn't fit in my budget. And so that would be a major impact on Americans, and it would impact the least among us more than anyone. And now what do you see? Building a massive pipeline from Russia to Germany? The Russians. And this is what happening, is that's where they're going to get their energy supply from, is from the Russians, because they're deciding to eliminate all their coal-generated power plants. And because of our American innovation that we have, we're decreasing cost of electricity around the country. More people are getting access to electricity, and we're reducing poverty. And so that's kind of where I see the economic impacts going, is people need to understand, do we want to be like Germany and have our electric costs tripled? Would you pay triple at the pump what you're paying right now? We've got a lot of freedoms here in Texas, and our cost of fuel is very low. And because of our competitive market, our electricity costs are low.
When it comes to the Green New Deal, there is a whole spate of historical analogies happening here. Some compare it to going to the moon, from President Kennedy's challenge to the actual landing on the moon in the 1960s. Some compare it to the Marshall Plan. Some compare it to confronting Nazi Germany. Of course, the term in the actual language is New Deal, which harkens back to the FDR's efforts to pull us out of the Great Depression. I know there's quite a bit of an economic debate about whether that actually helped to pull us out of the Great Depression. But the argument from the folks in support of this thing say that, look, we've got to be bold, we've got to be ambitious, because that's the way we're going to actually tackle a major challenge. So what do you say to that?
Well, I'd say when you look at the economic state that our nation was in when the New Deal was passed, is we were coming out of this Great Depression into a climbing out of that, and there was action that was needed by the federal government, and so they thought a New Deal, a welfare state, would be a good idea. I completely disagree with that. It wasn't a great deal. But now we're in this economic force, this time frame where record low unemployment, wages are going up, great things are happening in our country, and so now is the last thing that we need is a New Deal, and certainly not a green one that leads to higher costs across the country. I see the unions are worried about losing jobs, and they're absolutely right. They would, because they wouldn't be able to get to work. So our economy is chugging along and growing incredibly right now. The last thing we need is any kind of New Deal, specifically a Green New Deal.
Let's talk about what we know from the data so far, because there's a lot of different beliefs out there on this. Are you convinced in any way that humans are contributing to a changing of the climate, anywhere from a little bit, but not nearly to the extent that the Green New Deal folks say? The climate's always changing, so we don't know what human activity is doing, or are we getting closer to what the liberals are saying here?
I think there's certainly some cases where you can say humans are having an impact on climate. Look, when we dam up a river and create a big lake to supply hydropower, we're creating more humidity in that geographic area that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And so, but I don't think it's at the aspect of what people are saying, especially environmentalists, the radicals, the evangelicals, that are promoting that we completely go fossil fuel free today, because there are groups that are calling for it, that we need to go fossil fuel right now. I think this is collusion from other countries that are competing with us for our energy resources, and realizing that many thanks to Texans, we can produce energy and be profitable at around $40 to $50 a barrel of oil. Foreign countries, Russia, the Saudis, they don't like to see that. They're competing with us, and I think they're spreading disinformation and lying about the impact that man is actually having on our climate. And we are doing a great job here in the United States. We're reducing the toxins that we absolutely know to cause harm, not CO2, because look at our food supply is increasing because of the more CO2 that we have in the air. Our food supply has quadrupled in the last 100 years, and we're using the same amount of acreage as 100 years ago. And that's due in part largely because of CO2 that's available, and also the fertilizers are derived from natural gas.
I want to get into two more things in our last couple of minutes here. We're talking with Jason Isaac of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, former state representative in Texas. One of the things you write about here, Jason, is that it's basically an illusion that we could ever transform, at least in the near term, our economy to focus on renewables. The big contention here from Ocasio-Cortez and her allies is that we just need to transform our economy to this renewable energy-based economy. The jobs will be provided, and everyone will be fine economically. Your point here is that we're not anywhere close to actually being able to supply our energy needs with that type of technology.
No, and the renewables that Representative Ocasio-Cortez are talking about, wind and solar, currently make up about 11% of our electric generation portfolio in the country today. When you add in hydro and other forms, you get close to 20%. So we're going to have to make up 80% of our electric generation, be able to meet peak demand, which our renewables cannot do because we do not have the battery storage capabilities today. So we just simply cannot do it. 100% renewable isn't doable, and we need to continue to utilize the energy that we have and use our American innovation and spread that around the world. I will tell you that one thing that people don't point out is that in the renewables, wind and solar particularly, the rare earth elements that are used in there. And when you mine those rare earth elements, which traditionally doesn't happen in the United States because we have the Environmental Protection Agency that doesn't allow it, you mine those rare earth elements, and for every ton of rare earth elements that you get, you produce 1 ton of radioactive waste. And you just don't hear about that ever. So every time we promote wind and solar, we're actually promoting radioactive waste. And serving in the legislature, storing that waste is a huge battle. We have storage places here in Texas. There's some in Nevada. And storing that is a huge battle every 2 years in Texas when we're in a legislative session. And no one's talking about where we're going to put that extra radioactive waste if we do go 100% renewable wind and solar. It's just not talked about.
Finally, Jason, there's the policy debate and then there's the political debate. And I'm curious as to how much you think this will come to a head in the 2020 campaign, since we already have a number of Democratic candidates who have endorsed this, regardless of what form or format they've seen of this Green New Deal. Pretty much every Democratic senator who's in this race, I believe, from Gillibrand to Booker to Harris and Warren, have endorsed this thing. So is this going to be one of the big flashpoints of this campaign?
You know, when I've had people in the legislature come around and ask me to co-sponsor, co-author legislation with them, not many people were going around saying, hey, will you sign on to this bill that increases poverty, that's going to drive up the cost of electricity? And very rarely, never would I say, yeah, I'm all in. Where do I sign up? But here we are. People are just jumping to conclusions and are jumping to sign on to the Green New Deal. The last time I checked, every single Democrat candidate for president in 2020 has signed on to this Green New Deal. And it's just unfathomable to me that we're going to take on new parts, new debt. We're going to have a wealth tax. There's going to be a carbon tax. That it's just going to significantly increase our cost of living to a point where we can't stand it. And they want to eliminate poverty. And what this is going to do is this is going to put everyone in poverty. And I guess if everyone's poor, is there any poor people? Is there any poverty? Maybe not. But a government solution is not the solution. We need to continue with American innovation, which has led to cleaner air, more prosperity, and now we're exporting that freedom around the world.
Jason, we'll have to call time there. Thank you, sir, very much for your time today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Jason Isaac, former state representative in Texas. He's now the senior manager and distinguished fellow of Life Powered at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.